Are you ready?
Conrad opened his eyes to see Death standing over him, wearing a long fur coat that glistened with snow. Death's pale bony hand, with a ruby ring on each finger, reached towards him.
I looked for you at the Battle of Kaliningrad. I found many other soldiers,
Your friends?
Your enemies.
but I could not find you. I've been searching each pass of the Ural Mountains for 3 days until...
Why do you hide from me?
You cannot escape me.
So I ask you again.
Are you ready?
Conrad struggled to sit up. His limbs were numb from the cold, and he had barely eaten anything in 3 days. Death crouched down and offered their hand to Conrad. In Death's eyes, Conrad saw his troops-besieged camp ablaze. He heard the terrified cries of the men he left behind. He tasted the smoke coming off of a pile of burning bodies that should have included his. But the call of home had been too strong for Conrad, and so he fled. Now, Conrad looked at Death's outstretched hand and thought once more of his family back at home.
No, I'm not.
Death paused. Refusal was not uncommon, but it was rarely so defiant.
No.
And what should keep you here?
We were ambushed. I didn't get to tell my family goodbye. Please, our town should only be a few miles ahead. I will see them one last time, and then I will go with you. I promise.
I am not always kind, but I am fair.
I will give you 1 more day.
I will meet you in your town tomorrow, and then we will go.
Thank you.
Death brushed snow from the sleeves of their coat, and in a sudden gust of wind, they disappeared, leaving Conrad once again alone. With great effort, Conrad stood and began walking. His boots were heavy and soaked with frigid water. He braced himself at each step against the blinding, icy storm towards what he hoped was his home. He thought of Katya, his wife, his 2 children, Sasha and Sonia. They needed him. He urged himself forward, not knowing how long had passed, until suddenly, Conrad heard a voice call out.
Sir!
Out of nowhere, the figure of an old beggar woman appeared. Her cloak was tattered, and the falling snow disappeared against her white hair. She carried only a walking stick, the knotted pine matching the weathered, knotted hand that gripped it.
Sir! Is there any food you can spare?
Conrad opened his leather pouch. Only one dry, stale biscuit remained. He hesitated, knowing this biscuit could be the nourishment he needed to make it home. But he looked at the old woman's desperate eyes in front of him and sighed.
Here, take this.
The old woman's gray eyes widened.
But sir, this is too generous. Please split this biscuit with me so we each may have a small chance of survival.
No, my time is coming soon, and I cannot escape it. I hope this carries you to where you need to go.
Then let me offer you something in return for your kindness.
No, you are poor yourself and should keep anything you have. The only thing I need is more time, and that you cannot give me.
At this, the old woman's eyes sparkled.
Take this.
The old woman reached into her tattered cloak and pulled out a small bag. The cloth was a rich purple silk, tied with a golden ribbon.
Take these dice, and when you use them, you will win any game you play. And take this flour sack. Any beast you command to get in shall obey.
Conrad took the gifts from the old woman, putting the dice in his pocket and the sack in his bag. But when he looked up to thank the old woman,
Thank you for your kind...
The old woman had disappeared. Conrad sighed and continued the journey towards his home, but the winter storm had picked up. 1 step forward, 4 steps back. His fingers burned from frostbite. He could not hear the sound of his own breathing over the howling of the wind. Conrad fell to his knees, able to go no further.
My dear Katya, Sasha, sweet, sweet Sonia. I tried.
And as the snowstorm swirled a blinding white around him, everything faded to black. Conrad felt a heavy boot nudge his side. For the second day in a row, Conrad opened his eyes to see death standing over him, in a long fur coat, glistening with snow.
I looked for you in your town. I found the miller and a small girl of 9, but I could not find you.
I am sorry you did not make it.
But I was fair and gave you another day. So I ask you again,
Are you ready?
Conrad hesitated as Death crouched down and offered their hand.
No.
Death snapped up and straightened their coat.
We had a deal.
Death's icy stare cut through the winter storm like glass.
I didn't make it to town. I didn't reach them. I need more time.
You've been given more than enough.
1 more day.
Death reached out their bony hand towards Conrad.
No.
Conrad felt his family slipping quickly away from him.
Please.
No!
Suddenly, Conrad felt the dice heavy in his pocket.
What if we played a game for it?
What sort of game?
3s.
Conrad pulled out the purple cloth bag of dice, tied with a golden ribbon.
If I win, I have 1 more day to get home to my family. Then I am yours. If you win, I will go with you now. I promise.
Death fiddled with the ruby rings on their pale, bony fingers, considering. Conrad's time was overdue, but Death did love a game.
Let me raise the stakes.
If you win, I will grant you another 10 years.
I will return you to your home, to your family, where you will all live in health and happiness for 10 long years. After which, I will come for you, and you alone.
If you lose this game, however, you shall come with me now. And we will go and collect your wife to join us.
She is already ill with pneumonia, and she may not make the week.
The choice is yours.
Conrad gasped. Tears would have fallen, but they froze on his cheeks. Without money for medicine, Katya would likely die within the hour. He thought of Sasha and Sonia. Who would care for them? Conrad gripped the bag of dice in his pocket and hoped the old woman was telling the truth.
Deal.
Death smiled, and suddenly, a table and 2 chairs appeared. Death gestured to Conrad.
Have a seat.
Conrad put down his soldier's bag, took the chair across from Death, and they began to play. Conrad took the first round with 9 and 6 over 8 and 4, but Death took the second round, and the third, and the fourth and fifth. Around them, the wind screamed and the snow spiraled. The sound of the dice knocking against the table cut through the storm. Conrad felt his life slipping away from him. Hail pelted the ground, creating shimmering explosions of ice. The final round began with Death far in the lead. Death smiled at Conrad.
I'll go first.
Death rolled. The dice clattered on the wood and then were still. There was a pause. Then Death cackled.
12 and 10.
I do love games, and so rarely get to play them.
But now it is time for you to go with me. Take your final roll and let us leave.
Conrad breathed in, closed his eyes, and rolled. The dice clattered, and then they were still.
You cheated!
Conrad opened his eyes.
Freeze!
Death lunged across the table toward Conrad. The dice spilled onto the ground.
I am fair and just.
And you cheated me.
Conrad fell backwards over his chair and frantically crawled, feeling the heat of Death's rage getting closer behind him.
I come to all.
Conrad reached his soldier's bag.
And I shall have thee.
Conrad dug into his bag, rifling, searching, and finally felt the flour sack. And just as Death grabbed the back of his coat,
Get in the sack! I command thee!
Conrad held open the flour sack firmly, panting. Death fell silent. Suddenly, as if pulled by an imaginary string, Death was dragged into the sack. Conrad quickly tied the rope into 1,000 knots until he could be sure that Death could not escape. Finally, the bag was still and did not move. Relieved, Conrad sat back. He looked around him and noticed the snow had stopped falling. The wind was now a small breeze, and a calmness Conrad hadn't felt in weeks came over him. He gathered the dice, hoisted the sack and his soldier's bag onto his back, and began walking towards his home. The lights of the town got closer and closer, and when he reached the gate, Conrad saw his 2 children rushing for him.
Papa! Papa!
Sonia! Sasha!
He folded his children into his arms, and then they led him home, where Katya lay on a straw bed near the fire. Conrad knelt beside her and gently touched her face.
Katya,
Her eyes fluttered and opened slightly.
Katya, I'm home. And you will heal, and you will never be ill again.
Katya smiled weakly, and Conrad embraced her. He was home. Conrad made a stew from what vegetables he found, and spooned it past Katya's lips, warming her from within. Just as he felt his own fingers begin to tingle and regain feeling, Conrad saw Sonia pick up the flour sack.
Sonia, stop!
Sonia froze. Conrad staggered to his feet, throwing the bowl of soup dangerously close to the fire.
Papa, I'm just putting away your things.
Sonia, give it to me.
He ripped the sack from Sonia's arms.
Don't ever open this. Any of you.
Conrad hid the flour sack in the darkest corner of their home. Then he collapsed on the bed and finally began to sleep. And for 200 years, there was no death. The earth grew lush. Trees stretched to the sky, almost kissing the stars. Flowers sprung, covering meadows and fields in dizzying colors. Babies were born and grew into children, into adults, and into elderly men and women. And Conrad grew older too. He watched his children create families of their own, and fell asleep every night holding Katya, falling deeper and deeper in love. But, as the years passed, he watched the flowers overgrow, making the hills a nauseating kaleidoscope. The streets became crowded with throngs of people, most ancient and weary. And one morning at breakfast, he and Katya finally ran out of things to say. She avoided his eyes as she took his bowl to the wash bin. Conrad sighed, closed his eyes, and realized.
It is time.
Conrad looked at the sack that had lived in the darkest corner of his home for 200 years and started towards it. His bones creaked with every step in time with the floorboards. He touched the 1,000 knots of rope he had secured so long ago. His fingers, no longer nimble, struggled to pull apart the strands. For 10 years, he pulled and pulled. When the last knot came undone, Conrad fell back and watched as Death slowly crawled out from the bag, looking just as they did back in the Uriel Mountains. Death observed the overgrown flowers, the weeds that could not be cut, the people that flooded the streets. Death turned their gaze to Conrad, who sat weak and withered. They straightened their fur coat, adjusted the ruby ring on each finger, and asked,
Are you ready?
Conrad reached out for Death's hand.
Yes.
Death took Conrad's hand, and they slowly walked out of the house. Behind them, flowers began to wilt. Leaves fell. The ancient collapsed in the streets. The town wailed and the earth decayed. But they kept walking and walking, and eventually, seeds began to grow again. The seasons changed. The snow fell once more. And, as it was always meant to, time went on.